Hi, welcome to HTA 343 Globalization and Society, Power, Inequality, and Conflict. My name is Omar Ben Haman, and I'm here today to give you a guest lecture on globalization and global poverty. At the end of today's lecture, we should be able to first identify how and in what ways globalization contributes to poverty in the global north and global south. Second, explain the differences and similarities between key social theories on poverty and globalization. Finally, analyze the relationship between poverty and globalization, drawing upon relevant social theories. There are two main parts to today's lecture. The first part of the lecture discusses the links between globalization and poverty in the global south, drawing upon relevant concepts and theories. The second part of the lecture highlights that poverty is not just an issue in the global south, but also in the global north. A key conclusion to today's lecture is that debates on the links between globalization and poverty are quite mixed and divisive. While the pro-globalists argue that globalization is critical in eradicating poverty in both the global north and the global south, radical globalists believe the other way around. Before I am going to discuss the links between poverty and globalization in the global south, I think it is very important to define what does globalization mean. In fact, globalization is used to mean different things in different debates. For example, sociologists are quite divided when it comes to defining globalization. From functionalism perspective, globalization should be defined as a way to bring social change in a positive way. Globalization should bring society into harmony. Globalization should make society functions in a good way. However, for Marxism, globalization should be defined as a way to, or as an instrument to actually spread the ideas and principles of capitalism. So for Marxists or Marxism, globalization is there to, as Karl Marx actually argued, is there to exploit the working class. From gender perspective or feminism perspective, globalization should be defined as a way to emancipate women, to empower women, to bring change to the domains of women. Economists believe that globalization should be defined as a way to bring the financial means to people. So what does all this mean is that globalization or defining globalization is a bit complex, and there are different debates and ideas that actually shape the way we define globalization. However, I believe that globalization should be defined as a process that moves people, businesses, ideas, policies, information beyond national borders and cultures. There are others, especially the big agents of globalization, like the World Bank, who define globalization as the best way to address the issue of global poverty, especially in the global south. In today's lecture, when I'm talking about global south, I mean countries that are actually located in the south, here in 3 continents: Latin America, Africa, and Asia. These countries are usually poor, non-white. They are characterized by the lack of political stability. and they were actually previously colonized by the North. These countries are also called in the literature former colonies, third world developing countries, emerging markets, middle income, and the developed. So when you hear these kind of terms, they actually refer to the global south, to this part of the map. However, when I'm talking about the north, I mean countries that are actually located here in the south, in the north. This includes North America and countries from Europe. This also includes Australia. Although Australia is located here in the south, it is actually classified as part of the global north. The same thing applies to Singapore and Japan. Why these countries are, and they are not white actually, but they are classified as north because they have a strong economy. These countries in the north are actually rich and characterized by high income. Today, there are 4 key debates about poverty in the global south. So when we are talking about poverty in the global south, we need to take into consideration 4 key debates. So the first debate believes that there is too much poverty in the global south, and that's actually correct. If we see the index, if we see the numbers, the vast majority of people living in the south are actually poor. And this number says it all. More than 1 billion live in extreme poverty in the global south, which is more than 21% of the world's population. So numbers speak about poverty in the global south. There is too many or too much. The second debate that has been going on for quite a while in the literature is that poverty in the global south is considered an obstacle to the ideology of globalization. As long as we've got poverty in the global south, we can't actually expand the ideas of globalization. So, for instance, I've got McDonald's here. It is actually, McDonald's is an example of globalization ideas and processes. It does not really, it's mainly based in the north, not actually in the south. The second debate that has been going on as well in the literature is that poverty has a lot to do with tourism, especially from the global south. There is a kind of recognition of the links between violence and poverty. There are some scholars like Sassan in 2002 and Sachs in 2005 who believed that the issue, the 9/11, was actually as a consequence of poverty in the global south. People actually who joined ISIS or who joined Al-Qaeda, it wasn't just because they were radicalized, but it was actually because they were poor. That's why they were the target of the terrorist organizations. And this all means that global poverty is a threat to the project of globalization. So if we need to expand the ideas of globalization, we need first to fight poverty in the global south. The fourth debate has been actually focused on the human rights and on the ideas of democracy, equity, and all that stuff. They believe that we have to reduce the gap between the global south and global north. As long as we have too much poverty in the global south, that's no good. Ethically, it's not actually a great thing for globalization. And as I said before, if we need to expand and promote the ideas of globalization, we need to fight poverty. They thinking about fighting poverty in the global South started actually in the 1980s by these two guys, the former president of the United States, Reagan, and the former prime minister of the UK. These two guys believe that they are actually the big figures and advocates of globalization and ideas of globalization. They believe that since we have poverty in the global South, the ideas and principles of globalization, like global expansion, wealth accumulation, economic growth, can't actually be implemented. So if we need to, um, you know, if we need to implement these agendas and these ideas, we need first to fight poverty in the global South. That's why they actually suggested some policies and some ideas like this one. So the first thing they did, they actually introduced what's so-called debt relief. So they believe that as long as many countries in the global South have a huge debt, they can't. They are actually unable to fight poverty. So what the North did, they actually forgave them. You can see that the debt in the global South started to reduce during 1980s. But this debt wasn't actually free. It was actually conditional. So if any country wanted to get a debt relief, they had actually to implement what's so-called structural adjustment programs. These policies were actually introduced by the World Bank and IMF. So the pro-globalists believe that countries from the global South had actually to implement these policies if they want to get that relief. And these structural adjustment programs requires countries from the global South to implement some policies like open to free trade, reduce government spending, privatize state-owned enterprises. The North, or the pro-globalist, believe that if countries from the global South implemented these policies, that would lead to boost the economy and therefore fight poverty. You can see from this figure countries that actually that implemented structural adjustment programs between 1981 and 2004. And most of them are actually from the global South. There are some countries actually who rejected these policies, like Vietnam. Another way that have been actually introduced by pro-globalists to implement the agenda of or the ideas of globalization were actually some development projects like Millennium Development Goals, or what's so-called SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. This one was introduced in 2000, and the aims actually and the first goal, the main goal is to actually fight poverty in the global South. There is also Sustainable Development Goals. This was introduced in 2012, and it was actually an extension of Millennium Development Goals. So all these policies are aimed at fighting poverty in the global South. So the pro-globalists could implement the ideas of globalization. As I said before, poverty is a bad thing for globalization. That's why it should be eliminated. But have these globalization policies, such as SAPs and SDGs, really led to poverty reduction in the global South? I think the answers are quite mixed. Yes and no. It depends on what you talk to and the theory you look at. For instance, if we started from a sociological perspective with those who actually followed the ideas of functionalists like Emile Durkheim, Talcott Parsons, they believe that globalization has successfully managed to reduce poverty in the global south. Those who followed actually functionalism or functionalism ideas, we've got Hernando de Soto. He has done a lot of research on poverty in the global south, and he's a pro and he's an advocate of the ideas of globalization. He believes that the only way and the best way actually to help the global south to fight poverty is to bring the means of finance to them, microfinance, to encourage investors to invest there, and so on. We've got also this guy called Paralad. He died actually in 2010. He has this fantastic book called The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. He's talking about people who have been actually unexploited and unexplored in the global south, or people who are excluded in the financial system, and we need actually to, get into them and get them into the the global financial system. So for these kind of theories, they believe that globalization is good and has the potential to bring the means of finance that could help many poor in the global south. So we've got, for instance, here, this is De Soto. Hernando De Soto is a Peruvian economist. He did a lot in the global south. He did many field works, field work studies in the global south. He went to Peru, he went to many Middle Eastern countries, he went to Africa. He was working actually for the World Bank and IMF. So, and his idea, as I said before, is that we need to bring the means of finance to the poor, and that's the best way to help them to fight poverty. And there is here a video about the trip he did. The field, actually the documentary he did in Peru. He showed how globalization brought a lot of opportunities to people, to the poor people in Peru. I would really recommend you to watch this video. It's not actually that long. And pro-globalists, they use China as a good example of globalization. They believe that if China has succeeded to fight poverty, other countries could do as well. So they actually link, or they feel like the why China has managed to fight poverty is actually linked with the ideas of implementing the ideas of globalization. And as you see in this figure, the level of extreme poverty in China during 1980s was more than 80%. And that number started actually to reduce since China followed the ideas and principles of globalization, including structural adjustment programs. However, there are others who believe that this is actually quite wrong. China didn't actually manage to fight poverty because of globalization, but it was actually the choice of the country. And there were actually other factors like institutional factors, technology, education, and the will of the country. So those who believe that China actually wasn't able to fight poverty because of globalization, but it's actually the will and the institution and reforms that China did at the time. They use here the example of Vietnam. Vietnam actually didn't follow the ideas of globalization. They rejected actually structural adjustment programs. And you can see here today that Vietnam is quite well when it comes to the population who are living with less than $1.9 a day. They actually, Vietnam is much better than many countries who have implemented the ideas of globalization, like India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. On the other hand, we've got radical globalists. They actually believe that the issue of poverty is still there in the global south and will always be there because of three main reasons. So we've got, for instance, this guy. His name is Samir Amin. He is Egyptian French economist, and he is actually the main founder of dependency theory. So his ideas is that poverty will always be there as long as the South depends on advanced countries for trade and investment. He also believes that globalization does not fit the South. So the ideas we bring to the South, like investment, wealth, and all that stuff, it doesn't fit the needs and the particularities of the South. Amin believes also that South does not benefit from the fruits of globalization. Who benefits actually is the South, is the North countries or the global North. Globalization, according to Samir Amin, is there to exploit the South. For instance, they get cheap labor. Many people who work there actually they work in harsh conditions. So overall, radical globalists believe that globalization is not going to solve the problem. Global South countries need to have their own approaches, their own understanding of the problem of poverty because they are unique. They are not the same as the global North. He has a fantastic book here, and I would really recommend you, if you have time, to read it, called Unequal Development. I have also put here one of his lectures called The Path of Development for Underdeveloped Countries and Marxism speech. Very important. He's actually trying to criticize the ideas of globalization as unsuitable model for global South countries to fight poverty. We've got also feminist theory, especially those feminists who have been who are influenced by structural Marxism, like Nawal Saadawi. So for this kind of theory, believes that globalization does more harm than good to women. So their actually focuses on women. They believe that more women actually are involved in informal sector and agriculture brought by globalization. So they believe that globalization brought informal economy that actually makes women more vulnerable to low wages, harsh conditions, and so on. And it does not seem actually to solve the problem of poverty in the global south, especially for women. Instead, these kind of ideas of globalization are there actually to exploit women. They use numbers. For instance, there is like 70% of the people who live in extreme poverty are women and girls. And this is actually, this number comes from the World Bank. We've got also numbers here. You can see that poverty, women poverty is still more prevalent in the global South countries. Like in Africa, you see here, it's more than 86.7, while it's more than 71.4 here in Central and Southern Asia, while it's very less in the North countries. In summary, the impacts of globalization and poverty in the global South, as I said before at the beginning of this lecture, are quite mixed and divisive. And for the pro-globalists, globalization has significantly transformed the social life of many poor people in the global South. China is a good example of this. There are others, like radical globalists, who believe that globalization does more to harm the poor of the global South than to help them. Think here again, or refer here to Samir Amin. However, if it comes to my stance, I think as a researcher from the global South, globalization might assist actually to reduce poverty in the global South. But I think this would require pro-globalists to offer, what I mean by pro-globalist, the World Bank and the West, to offer new development approaches to fight poverty. The ideas of market, microfinance actually have failed to reduce poverty in the global South, because these kind of institutions are actually motivated by profit, and they are not there actually to fight, to help people, to help countries to fight poverty. And what is missing here actually is that the pro-globalists, the pro-globalists who are actually the institutions, the financial institutions like the World Bank I have mentioned before, have failed to understand what does poverty mean. They actually feel like poverty is just to provide the financial means to the poor, and that's the only way to fight poverty. That's actually wrong. Poverty, I believe that poverty is quite complex and dimensional. They need actually to understand the cycle of poverty, what actually makes people, to be poorer. We need first to invest in their education. We need to invest in their health, and without investing in this kind of very basic things, I don't think that poverty is going to be addressed or eradicated in the global South, because the financial model has actually showed its limitation, and it does not actually help the poor to to fight poverty. And in conclusion, this is the last slide. I would argue that globalization has failed actually to fight poverty in the global South. The evidence is that we've got 1 billion people live in slums today. And you know what does it mean to live in slum? We've got another 2 billion people who are active in informal economy. So this all means that globalization ideas and approaches have failed to address poverty in the global South. This is all about the first part of the lecture, and I think we should stop here, and they will see you in the second lecture, on the second part of the lecture on globalization and poverty in the global South. in the global north. Sorry. Thank you.